bare minimum compromise. I truly do fear that the Stop Killing Games initiative is about to be hit by the old AAA games industry playbook. And more specifically, I'm referring to their lobbyist arms such as the Entertainment Software Association or Video Games Europe, which we're going to be extensively talking about their statement on Stop Killing Games, which is a massive attack on this movement, and it really should show what's about to be coming ahead. And we've seen this playbook before from the AAA games industry a couple of years ago with the whole loot box debacle. They decided that their best way to solve that issue and sway lawmakers from regulating microtransactions and stuff of that like in video games was by adding a in-game app purchases sticker to video game copies. Vague and it doesn't specifically say if it has DLC or if it has loot boxes or other types of microtransactions. That was the way that the video game industry got lawmakers off of their back. And now I feel like that playbook is about to come out in this form. And it's actually something that has already been made law in certain parts of, well, the US. New California law means digital stores can't imply you're buying a game when you're merely licensing it. The law will go into effect next year, which is this year. We've already seen one platform take this on, and that was Steam, who says now the game that you're buying is really just a license. That is the bare minimum compromise I truly fear that the AAA games industry is getting ready. And in terms of the game preservation efforts with Stop Killing Games, I said in the last video, and I'll say it again, that is not good enough. And this isn't like coming out of the middle of nowhere either. Somebody such as PirateSoftware, this is literally what he wants from this initiative. He thinks that this should be what people are fighting for. This was in his initial video on Stop Killing Games 10 months ago.
Players down the line in the way that it is currently written. And I think that starting a conversation that doesn't get to the core of the issue is both wasted time and leads to potentially bad outcomes. So if we want to talk about this, let's talk about the actual bad business practices. In the case that a studio is making a live service game and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game. I think that we should be fighting about that. That needs to go away.
Yeah.
A player should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license, not buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license, to protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be better informed to the player at time of purchase. So I agree on that. This doesn't bring that up, though.
Yeah, that's all he wants from this initiative, and he has made that clear in multiple streams and videos, and he has been the most vocal proponent to this initiative. And even just as of the other day on his own stream, he was wishing, well, this is what he had to say.
Over my life, despite physical evidence to prove to the contrary. And they also went after every job I ever held, trying to say that I never worked them, or if I did work them, that I never deserved them.
And what he's referring to is he was known for, I think he started off as a QA tester. Some other game developers have come out calling out his qualifications, saying that he's kind of overinflated what he did at Blizzard and his past history in the video game industry. But this is specifically the part where he, again, goes after Stop Killing Games.
So I'm going to be honest with you. I hope that your initiative gets everything you asked for, but nothing you wanted.
Never seen so much salt from a man, but like I said, there's no stopping this initiative. It is truly taking off. It has reached its goal of 1 million signatures, but it definitely needs a lot more. Obviously, I will have a link in the description to sign. Right now, it's almost at 1.2 million, so Ross Scott has already brought this up, but it really does need to get to around 1.4 million. Honestly, if it gets more signatures, that would be even better. But this is the biggest, like, PirateSoftware is one thing, you know, one of these vocal individuals that misled the public on what Stop Killing Games was all about. That was the problem in of itself, but now it's finally being taken serious by these individuals. The AAA games industry, the companies that are parts of, well, lobbyist groups such as the Entertainment Software Association, Capcom, Bandai Namco, Electronic Arts, Epic, they're all a part of this trade organization. But this is the trade organization for the United States. Then we get over to Video Games Europe, which is pretty much just, it's the exact same thing, basically. They represent Activision Blizzard, a bunch of other companies, Bandai Namco, EA, the same people, pretty much. Epic, Netflix, Nintendo, Roblox, Sega, Take-Two Interactive, Ubisoft, Warner Brothers, ZeniMax, so on and so forth. And now they have finally come out with their attack, which shows that this initiative is finally making an impact, and yes, the AAA games industry is definitely worried and scared. And it also means that if people are really serious about this initiative taking off, this pressure that has mounted right now, largely because of Pirate Software, needs to continue. It must. And this is the statement that they put out, but this is not the only statement that they put out. We're about to get to their other one, which is a lengthy read. We'll get to that in a second, but this is their initial statement, which has gone viral on social media. We appreciate the passion of our community. They don't care. This is a lobbyist arm. They don't give a shit. However, the decision to discontinue online services is multifaceted, never taken lightly, and must be an option for companies when an online experience is no longer commercially viable. And that is exactly what all of us want to change. From the start, with game development, this needs to be considered, and making sure that it is viable to be played in a functional state. And I do not think that's unreasonable to ask. We understand that it can be disappointing for players, but when it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of the prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection laws. This is what they're relying on heavily. It's the current consumer laws, which, yes, the video game industry, this is what they're comfortable with. They do not want that changing at all, and they are going to fight tooth and nail to ensure that. These legal fights and these little town hall meetings in which, lobbyist arms and individuals, they will show up and argue on their behalf. And I don't say what you will, but money does get passed under the table for stuff like this, and that's why my big concern is that we're going to see bare minimum compromise. Private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protections we put in place to secure players' data, remove illegal content, and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave right holders liable. In addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. Yes, because the video game industry really does care about budgeting these games. It's not like the last fucking Call of Duty game didn't cost already $800 million. This gaming industry burns money so easily. This is just bullshit talk that they're giving. Might I add, an argument that falls on deaf's ear when you consider that these companies are raking in billions and recording record quarters every single year. Indeed, they've built their empires largely on anti-consumer practices, but indeed, those deserve to be challenged at this point. We welcome the opportunity, and here it goes, we welcome the opportunity to discuss our position with lawmakers or policymakers, and those who have led the European Citizens Initiative in the coming months. And this is not where it stops here, because they have a much more detailed statement here, which is also listed on their website. And they call this their position on the discontinuation of support to online games. And the first two paragraphs repeat pretty much the same shit that they had in their original statement, saying that they care about players and their voice and whatever. No, they don't. Their interest is on whatever the AAA games industry these companies are coming up with. And specifically, this is where they get into details about why this initiative must fail. Unlike a book or a film, an online video game is not a static work. Online video games are interactive entertainment that combine numerous elements of artistic and intellectual creation with software programming and server infrastructure. Online video games evolve over time after their initial release, providing consumers with regular new content experiences, patches, and updates. This is highly valued by players and is required to compete in the market. It involves significant ongoing development expenditure over years, sometimes decades. And having a plan from the get-go about having a functional version of that game, most people, 99%, are going to say that really should be what's happening here. And it's also something that you could say really about end of life, something that these companies should be planning it for. Video game companies put significant investment into creating and developing the best interactive entertainment. They go on to say, the right to decide how, when, and for how long to make an online video game services available to players is vital in justifying this cost and fostering continued technical innovation. As right holders and economic entities, video game companies must remain free to decide when an online game is no longer commercially viable and to end continued server support for that game. And that emphasis is right there on server support. And again, this is just one of the things that all of us want to see changed. We want to be able to see that these companies, these publishers, have to consider this when they're making the choice to work on a live service experience. But this is not what they want, because they want the status quo to remain. Oh, and also the part where they say companies should be free to decide when an online game is no longer commercially viable. Yeah, nobody's against that. That's kind of irrelevant, although there is instances like Concord, which, again, say what you will about Concord, But 14 days it was on the PlayStation Store and it was completely shut down. Yes, people got refunds, but still removed from history for the most part. But there is indeed a difference between a game publisher taking a game offline and there being a functional version for people to use on servers and such. Big difference. Now, imposing a legal obligation to continue server support indefinitely or to develop an online video game in a specific technical manner that will allow permanent use will raise the costs and risk of developing such games. It will have a chilling effect on game design and act as a disincentive to make such games available in Europe. And guess what? I think most people are a-okay with all of this so far. It is far from a trivial modification or a simple addition to the game development phase. It would ignore material, reputational, safety, and security concerns. And I need you to understand what this video game lobbyist arm is preparing people for. It's the argument that you have to think about the kids in terms of safety and security concerns. Think about the kids. What could happen if they end up on a private server and some nasty, illegal content is shown to them? And the companies are now held liable. And that's the part where the video game industry is probably going to try arguing this once they end up in front of policymakers and lawmakers and just say that part. And the policymakers most of the time will be like, okay, well, as long as you're funding my next campaign and stuff. At least that's how it works in the US, I swear. Now, while there are video game companies that have elected to enable their online games to live beyond that as being proposed their commercial viability, this is and must always be a matter of choice, as it will depend on what is reasonable and appropriate for the specific game company, and audience. All video games, whether digital or physical copies, are licensed. Like I said, people, this is what's going to be coming soon. You don't own the games. As is the case with virtually all digital works, when consumer purchases online video games, regardless of the country of sale, what they acquire is a personal license to access and play the copy of the game, and they have purchased in accordance with the game's terms of service. The consumer does not acquire ownership of that video game. These clear intellectual property rights underpin the entire market and enable the strong investment of the industry, blah, 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 blah. There is no legal uncertainty about the status quo of video games. Why an obligation on video game companies to provide only limited type of end-of-life plan is disproportionate. It is not clear what the initiators of the Stop Killing Games petition seek to achieve as a legal change. It is clear. It really is. It appears to be a combination of a requirement to provide online services for as long as consumer wants them. That's not what the argument is. It really isn't. Regardless of price paid, and or a requirement to provide a very specific form of end-of-life plan where the game is altered to enable private servers to operate. We do not believe these are proportionate demands, and I disagree. Online video games are complex operations. They offer interactive features that are supported by multiple servers, enabling functionality of ever-increasing complexity. This is integral to the modern gameplay experience that players expect. As consumer expectations for more engaging and evolving content increases, these online features are increasingly becoming intertwined in the overall gameplay experience. They go on to say, in many video games, these interconnected dependency make it difficult to cleanly segregate online features from online functionality. Here are the ways in which players and companies could be affected or would be affected. Reduced or no player protection. Here's the first one. Again, this is the type of stuff that they're going to say in front of policymakers. Requiring games to run on private servers would result in the inability for game companies to continue to protect players from illegal or harmful conduct. Yes, because the video game industry does a fucking great job at that. It's not like almost all PC games are infected with hackers. This is a prevalent problem, and I just love this argument that they're making. Jesus. They go on to say next, as their moderation and player safety teams would no longer be involved. Most of these companies, like Activision, they've been firing their player safety teams. They don't care about these efforts. They're using AI to rely on that. In particular, cheating could become rampant, which is already a massive thing already, without proper enforcement. And this is something why, private servers or community servers, this is something that these individuals, that's what they would handle. And it's worked tremendously with a lot of experiences over the years. This is history that they're not going to bring up in their one-sided argument here. Reporting systems designed to allow players to flag problematic content and behavior to game companies would no longer operate as intended, or would have to be disabled entirely. The absence of effective moderation systems would create a less safe environment for consumers and may foster the proliferation of undesirable content, while simultaneously frustrating the ability for EU digital service coordinators to act against such content. This not only presents a security risk for consumers, but it could also lead to brand reputation issues for the video game company. And yeah, that's another argument that they're going to make. It's that Activision or Ubisoft or EA or whatever company could be held liable, or the public may consider them for allowing this type of stuff to run rampant for whatever game that they used to run. And the problem with that is, modding exists, you know? I've never heard that argument ever being made about Skyrim or any of the many other games over the years with modding. And I feel like they're just overinflating this point to, again, they're trying to make their perspective sound as solid as possible, but there's so many little holes here. And the next one, again, another one, increased security risks. Releasing game code or server binaries to facilitate the creation of private servers operated by players could expose game companies and consumers to bad actors, malware, data breaches, and DDoS attacks. You know, the same exact fucking things that are already prevalent with so many games over the years, and this AAA games industry struggles in of itself to do so. You know, maybe having like a content warning or a notice saying if you're going to download or server binaries or do anything, you're on your own, and I feel like that's enough. Many of these individuals are a-okay with that being a consequence of trying to play a game that they used to many years ago. And yeah, this point is silly, especially with the fact that, you know, community, private servers, not this new concept, something that's been along for a long time and never been a rampant or prevalent issue at all. Many instances, actually, in which the private servers are in a better functional state than the actual, you know, game. It does continue. It says significant engineering and architectural challenges. Yes, because this would be very difficult to make possible. Allowing players to run private servers would present significant engineering. Those challenges for many games due to the way in which such online features are integrated with other proprietary systems and services required for the game. That's a you problem. That's not an us problem. That's something that you would have to consider when you're making the decision to make an online live service in the future. We're not talking about past games. We're talking about future. Setting a new precedent moving forward for this industry. Creating a private server compatible version would be a prohibitive cost, in some cases years or decades after the game's initial release, when only a small audience remains. And again, all of this, if it's not clear, a lot of these are just points that PirateSoftware has been bringing up, and now the AAA games industry, and more specifically the lobbyist arms, are parroting this perspective too. Very interesting how alike these positions are from both Pirate and the AAA industry. Negative impact on investment in games. Again, they're just going to make the argument that jobs could be lost because of this. Ensuring an online game can work without official server support requires a significant investment of engineering resources, making it a very costly exercise for video game companies. Many of the costs that game companies would incur in implementing an end-of-life plan would have to be incurred towards the end of the commercial life of the game, when it is no longer commercially viable to continue support. Requirements to implement such plans could lead to less risk-taking, fewer investment projects in developing new games, because this industry isn't all about sequels and fucking remakes at this point. And potentially fewer jobs. Ultimately, it could lead to increased costs for consumers and less choice. And yeah, because the cost for consumers isn't already skyrocketing, so ridiculous. And then they say reputational harm here. Allowing players to run private servers with online interaction possibilities could result in players using those games in ways that don't align with the game company's brand values, leading to a negative association with the brand, thereby harming its reputation. Again, I'm just going to say the same thing. Mods exist, and even then, we have seen companies like Capcom, they have come out saying they are against offensive mods that, they're offensive to public orders and morals. And we've seen Nintendo, how they react to mods as well. So this gaming industry, this one, it just does not work. This gaming industry does not like anything that is out of their control. And that's ultimately what this would cause. They would have to allow players to being able to play games that they don't want people playing. They want people sticking to the remakes, the sequels, and the remasters, because that's where all the money is made. And once you challenge that notion, problems ensue. And we've seen how mods, especially gaming companies like Take-Two Interactive, have gone after modders. They've taken games offline or mods offline to ensure that their remasters get as much attention and make as much money as possible. This games industry is a-okay with mods until it hurts the bottom line. That's why there is very few AAA companies that have come out saying that, yes, we support modding. We support allowing people to mess with our games and change things as much as they want. From Bethesda to CDPR, there's very few examples. And even then, some of these companies, there's a financial incentive for that support. But they continue going, saying impact on intellectual property rights, erosion of their rights, mandating game companies to keep their online games operable post-official support would undermine their rights and autonomy in deciding how their intellectual property is utilized. Yes, they're hinting here that they would not be able to make remasters, remakes, and sequels and stuff like that if people are going to continue to go back and play those older games. There's a vital interest in maintaining effective copyright protection, including protection against circumvention of technologies that control access to copyrighted video game software, where such circumvention is undertaken in circumstances that would lead to the unauthorized public exploitation of games. I love that one. Competition from community-supported versions. This is what I'm talking about. Such a requirement could lead to community-supported versions of games competing with official versions, potentially jeopardizing the financial investments of the video game companies. This would lead to confusion between trademarks, and the original trademark holder may be held responsible for actions undertaken by a community-supported version. Again, overflating this point of view drastically here in this statement. Forfeiture of licensing and reproduction rights, allowing consumers to create or run modified copies of online games, would necessitate game companies to either license additional rights or refrain from enforcing them, effectively leading to a forfeiture of control over these rights. And this is something that could be negotiated in the development of these games. This is something that they're missing here. Because yes, a lot of AAA games have licensing agreements that after 10 years, music for whatever game has to be removed. And that's something that's more notable nowadays because of the all-digital age. Back in the physical age, I mean, when you had physical game companies that were prevalent, I mean, those, licensed songs were there. They're still there to this day. But the AAA games industry, this is an easy workaround. This is something that could easily be put into notices or put into the fine prints that these companies, maybe if there's going to be a functional version of this game left behind, that certain songs and stuff have to be taken out. And I don't think many people take an issue with that. Constraints from third-party IP. Game companies often utilize third-party software and services which may have licensing terms restricting their use. This is what I'm talking about. Their use of the commercial life of the game or prohibiting sub-licensing to players, thereby hindering the modification or patching of games for private servers. In particular, this could jeopardize and infringe the copyright of the musical works and lead to legal action from these right holders. That's not going to happen. Again, you set a new precedent moving forward. This will be put in the fine print by whatever legal team is behind these games. These AAA game companies already have fantastic legal teams. This will be something that, they'll negotiate, and this is just a non-issue here. Constraints from third-party services. Games depend on third-party services such as platforms on which the game is offered to the consumer. Releasing the code for those services, which would be necessary should a legal requirement allow player communities to run a game, may not be possible, as this would potentially be an IP infringement. Again, this is another non-issue. You're not going to be convincing people that, because Xbox and PlayStation would be harmed, or even Steam. This is ridiculous. And there's a history of all these experiences. This has never been something that's happened. Furthermore, game company servers are increasingly run on the cloud. If cloud servers are discontinued, which sometimes happens, this necessitates either shutting down older titles or creating costly workarounds. Well, those costly workarounds is what we're all a fan of at this point. The latter may not always be possible. And this part here, this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, the whole PEGI rating thing that they're thinking about. Think about the kids with all this. All of the above would also affect compliance with PEGI ratings. Where a game has a PEGI age rating and offers multiplayer functionality, the game company is contractually bound by the PEGI Code of Conduct to respect various obligations related to online safety and privacy. The inability to do so would expose the game company to legal uncertainty with respect to its contractual obligations under the PEGI Code of Conduct, something that easily could be changed by the AAA games industry. Because, ladies and gentlemen, guess who runs PEGI? Guess who runs the ESRB? The fucking video game industry. And that's something that they'll play dumb about when they're in front of regulators and legislators and policymakers. But yes, the PEGI system, it's self-regulation. It was formed by the Federation of Europe, Interactive Software, the video game industry. The video game industry runs these rating organizations. And it's so silly that, the code of conduct could become problematic. They can change that themselves if they fucking wanted to, but obviously they don't, because there's a financial interest to keep the status quo and how it's been. They go on to say that the importance of consumer protection laws, and this whole section right here, I'm going to kind of skip over it for the most part, because it's just them saying the current laws, we should be happy with it. That's what they're arguing. Notwithstanding the applicable licensing structure, all video games offered to players in the EU are subject to European consumer protection laws, which include robust transparency. This is what I mean. They're praising what works for them right now. And of course, they're going to applaud something that has made them fucking billions and trillions. Robust transparency, fairness obligations on game companies, and ensure that game companies act reasonably when terminating online support for a game. Games are licensed to the consumer in accordance accordance with their terms of services. They say, yeah, transparency, players must be given reasonable prior notice before any termination of access to the game. This is them saying that we should be happy with how online live services. A lot of the time you get a couple months to know that these games are forever gone, and we should be happy with that. That's what they're arguing right here. Reimbursements, the Digital Content Directive provides consumers with price reduction and reimbursement rights in certain, again, they're praising things that really don't even exist in most of these instances. Because with a game like Anthem, you're not getting money back, I promise you that, which just got the announcement the other day that it's being delisted forever. And no matter what you think about these online live services, whether you hate Anthem or whatever game that has been canceled, preserving that history I do think is important for the future of this industry. And also, say what you will about a game like Anthem, but I said this last video, that those flying mechanics were pretty fucking amazing, and that game still had potential, and I would have loved to see if it could live on in community servers and stuff in the future, or even being able to show it in the future, but the AAA games industry is firmly against that. Now next we get to a really funny one. Video game companies are committed to the preservation of games and their cultural value, and this one's a specific hit at Stop Killing Games. It's important to separate the legal proposals being made by the petitioners for specific end-of-life requirements for commercial video games from the question of the preservation of games as creative and cultural works. Video Games Europe, the lobbyist arm of the AAA games industry, and their member companies are committed to and actively support serious professional efforts to preserve video games and recognize the industry's creative contributions under blah, 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 blah. And guess what the ESA has to say, which again is just the American version of this trade group. Members won't support any plan for libraries to preserve games online. So you may be, wondering, what do they mean if they really do support game preservation? Well, I shit you not, they're talking about fucking museum exhibits for some games. Like, imagine this, just in the future, an older game, whatever live service, maybe 30, 40 years in the future, you go to a museum, you see an older game, and you're talking to the exhibitor, they're showing out gameplay, they're showing images of this, and then you're like, wow, I'd love to give this a try and see, this history of the video game industry, where things began. And the exhibitor's just gonna be like, well, guess what? Sorry, you can't do any of that. The video game industry is against those efforts. And that's ultimately what we're fighting. We want the history to be preserved. And just because, certain games have lower, player counts, a lot of that is to do with sequels and remakes and remasters that come out with a lot of these entries over the years. We want to change that status quo. That is one of the big missions of Stop Killing Games, and that is firmly what most gamers are behind, and for good reason. The video game industry, especially executives, love to say that this medium, it's a work of art. Every game is art. But unfortunately, though, it looks like maintaining history, maintaining these games for future generations to view and see and play, I guess that's a step too far. For what it's worth, they also say that the other examples of game preservation is them donating game copies and hardware to preservation organizations, which that's clearly not enough in this, and not enough games are being captured. I mean, hell, I talked about this last video, but 87% of classic games have been lost to time, and that is because the video game industry does not care about game preservation efforts at all. And they continue, this is the final thing they say about this: the industry's innovation and economic activity depends on strong copyright protection for the software and other creative works that are its lifeblood, and preservation efforts should not be confused with uses that could conflict with normal exploitation of the work by the right holder or unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the author. And this was the one-sided dog shit argument from the video game industry that they're going to throw in the face of lawmakers. And man, oh man, this is going to be a fight, and I hope people understand that this initiative does have the AAA games industry scared, but they very much are gearing up their lawyers for this fight. And to understand who represents Video Games Europe, when I say it's like Activision, Ubisoft, EA, and all these, it legitimately is them. It's executives that work for these companies. The chairman is Hester Woodliff, and she works at Warner Brothers Games. She's got credits in all of them. She's vice president. Cannon Pence, Epic Games, Activision, Embracer, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, Take-Two Interactive, Ubisoft, Bandai Namco, Square Enix. All these companies are part of the board of Video Games Europe. This is the video game industry, the AAA games industry, attacking the Stop Killing Games initiative. And specifically, we also have Carrie Hopkins, Electronic Arts, who the last big legal fight that we had with video games was loot boxes, and she was a big part of that fight.
I know that ain't who I think it is.
Do you consider loot boxes to be an ethical feature of your games? Kerry?
Well, first, we don't call them loot boxes. I think that was
Whatever term you wish to apply to them, do
so
you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics, but I think it's important to look at this. So if you go to a I don't know what your version of Target is, but a store that sells a lot of toys, and you do a search for surprise toys, what you'll find is that this is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises, and so it's something that's been part of toys for years, whether it's Kinder Eggs or Hatchimals or LOL Surprise. We do think the way that we have implemented these kind of mechanics, and FIFA, of course, is our big one, our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs, is actually quite ethical and quite fun.
Gambling mechanics. That was their defense here, and this is them. Electronic Arts was in front of UK regulators and lawmakers, and they were talking about, loot boxes and potential regulation, and they came up with this dog shit argument, but unfortunately, it was enough for the UK. And that's what makes me a little bit nervous about the Stop Killing Games initiative once this gets in front of lawmakers and you have dumbass executives pulling out this nonsensory. And that's why I do think the bare minimum compromise might be what's ahead, and that is ultimately what PirateSoftware and I guess this AAA games industry, that's what they're going to settle for. That's probably what we're headed for, and that definitely has me concerned. And that's why, keeping up this effort, keeping this Stop Killing Games initiative in the news is very, very important for this continuing to gain momentum and also continuing to gain signatures to a point where the AAA games industry, they can't pull off shit like this. Because by the time that this happened in 2019, a lot of people had already moved off from the Star Wars Battlefront 2 with the whole ordeal that happened with that. But I do think game preservation is a little bit more important in the eyes of a lot of gamers, and I do hope that this gets the sustained eyes that is necessary. And I do think that momentum, the amount of people giving this attention, hopefully will sway lawmakers into doing the right thing, but maybe that's just an unreasonable position. But I certainly hope it's not, and I really do hope the right thing happens and a new precedent is set. And like I said, this is what they settled last time for. The video games understanding in-game purchases. Based on clear existing guidance, the industry communicates with players, making sure that offers to buy in-game content are in line with consumer laws and that players have all the information they need to feel confident and in control when they spend money. They applauded these efforts. They rolled it out, tons of marketing saying, look at us, we're being understanding, we're representing, the needs of consumers, showing that we actually do care about these issues. It wasn't. It was a bare minimum compromise, and that's what this industry is good for at this point. And other individuals have deconstructed these statements. I did love this comment somebody perfectly brought up saying, not a single word in the original statement about the rights not offered to consumers and how these same companies that ensure that players are given fair notice to prospective changes are selling a product, taking our money, and then shut down the servers a few months after the release. They are right. Under the EU law, we have a right to returns 14 days after the purchase for all digital and physical goods. Most games are shut down after those 14 days. It's so clear that this lobby group will fight this initiative very, very hard, and with lots of money that we as consumers cannot counter. It's telling that the most greedy publishers form this group and not those who really love the art of making games. Very, very true. And we have seen other game developers. That's what I mean with PirateSoftware. He's been trying to say that he's representing, all game developers. That's the perspective of so many. But here's one example. We have a game designer who is also a professor at Northeastern University, and this is a game developer's point of view on it. Do you think the movement will hold sway with regulators? I hope it does. We're at a tipping point where digital ownership norms are being challenged. Public backlash like this can influence platform policies or push developers to include safeguards such as offline modes or commitments to keep games alive. And that offline modes point right here is something that actually happened with a notable live service in the past, and that was Redfall. Right at the end of development, the final update, they brought upon it an offline mode so the online live service could be continued into the future. Don't care what your opinion on Redfall is, I didn't like it, but still, this is stuff that needs to be encouraged, and we need more of that in the future. And hopefully a legal, ruling will declare that things like this is the new norm moving forward. Not necessarily just obviously offline modes, but server binaries and stuff to that extent. Just having a functional version of a game after its end of life. That's what people are arguing and hopeful for in the future. But this Northeastern professor, he did continue saying, it will likely require sustained pressure and clear consumer rights around digital goods to create real, lasting change. It reminds me of the loot boxes movement, which also started with European pressure, and it did eventually lead to certain countries, such as Belgium and Netherlands, regulating and outlawing loot boxes. So regardless of what your opinion on Stop Killing Games or PirateSoftware or any of this, it has finally reached the eyes of the AAA games industry, and they definitely are nervous. And with a statement like what they provided here, they're definitely gearing up for a massive legal battle, and it's going to be very interesting to see the bullshit arguments that they throw in front of policymakers. And I just really hope that the intense public backlash is something that is felt for lawmakers to hopefully do the right thing and set a new precedent moving forward for this video game industry. Anyway, what do you make of the video game industry, Video Games Europe, their statement here? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.